Friends and followers, dear subscribers, today is the day we're going to truly enjoy some real chess. That's why I brought out my best board, my best camera, and my best microphone. So this video is a complete experience for all of you. So if you're doing something else, I recommend you focus on this video, because if you like chess, you're really going to enjoy this. Check out the opening I'm bringing you today. The opening of the gods. The weirdest opening in chess, and at first glance, the worst. If I were to ask you, hey, dear followers, what would be the worst move we could possibly play in this position? Surely one of the ones that would come to mind would be this move right here, a6. Well, watch out. This is called the opening of the gods. And today we're going to see nothing less than how they beat Anatoly Karpov with this opening. Careful, it took me a long time to find this game, but I finally found it. Who is Anatoly Karpov, you asked? Are you seriously asking me that? World chess champion and one of the greatest players in the history of the game. That's why if they can beat him with this opening, they can beat anyone. And you can take note of it because almost nobody knows how to counter it. Look, here the most common response is d4, to take the center. You all know that controlling the center is of vital importance in chess. The one who controls the center has an advantage over their opponent. And that's why it seems like this opening isn't good at all, because we're basically giving the center away to our opponent. Well, pay attention, because the second move here is b5, and it's a super important move. Two moves that always go hand in hand in this opening. You don't have to think much. You're always going to play a6 and b5. That's why this opening will likely be easy for you to play and will give you good results. How would a normal everyday game continue from here? Well, the normal thing would be knight f3, developing the pieces to be able to castle. Our opponent would normally continue in a natural way, and that's why we played a6 and b5 to develop our bishop through this fianchetto here and directly keep an eye on this pawn. It's important not to develop the knights first in this opening, because since we don't have pawns fighting for the center, our opponent could quickly gain some time while attacking them. And it's exactly the same thing with the other knight. That's why we're going to play bishop b7, directly aiming at the e4 square. There are two ways to defend this pawn. With the knight, which seems very bad because they kick our knight out and once it's gone we capture here, or the other, which seems much better, which is bishop d3. While developing a piece for castling, he defends this point that we're attacking with our bishop, okay? Here, Anatoly Karpov, after the move knight f6, played queen e2. This is the original game in which they beat Anatoly Karpov. Just for that, I deserve a big thumbs up. So look, e6, a super important move if you want to play this opening. Why is this opening so easy, and why does it give such good results? Because in every single one of your games, you'll play these moves, and usually in this same order. A6 and b5, you develop the bishop. And now you bring out the knight and the pawn to be able to develop your other bishop, okay? Once you have all this planned out, now the real game's going to begin. For example, what happens if they try to destroy this pawn chain over here? Which is actually what Anatoly Karpov played. Well, whenever they attack you here, you have to think about one thing. What if they capture? Can we recapture? Nah, for two reasons. First, because here they trade rooks and then we lose this pawn, right? Oh, okay, that would be the important part. So I recommend that whenever they play a4, you can come here and play b4. A very important move. It stops this knight from developing, and if they ever want to play c3 or c4, this pawn can always capture. In this case, Anatoly Karpov's opponent played c5 directly, and he didn't care if they captured here because he planned to capture the center pawn. So Karpov first captured this pawn here, and after the capture with this bishop, he didn't capture this pawn either because it didn't worry him much. Instead, he preferred to develop his knight. Could he have developed it through here? Yes, but we're facing the same old problem. They can play b4 and attack this knight, which, look, right now could only go backward because it has no squares forward. That's why he developed his knight via d2. Now this knight could come out this way, attacking this bishop, a very good move by Anatoly Karpov. Before they capture him, Notice that he plays b4. As I told you, b4 is a very interesting move whenever they try to break through with the move a4. Here, the black pieces took a little while to play. I recommend playing it right away to avoid any kind of trouble. Okay, here we find one of the problems many of you are probably wondering about. What if, by not fighting for the center, they attack our knight with one of the pawns? For now, nothing happens, because we have this great square to place our knight. In case they want to kick it out, we can capture this pawn en passant, and absolutely nothing would happen here. Therefore, this knight is very well placed. Look, if I ask you now, are the black pieces much worse off? Now, surely you'll all answer no. Many of you will even tell me they're better off. That means this opening isn't bad at all, and you'll drive all of your opponents crazy. Look, here white played knight to e4, a super interesting move, because 1, it centralizes the knight, 2, it attacks the bishop, and 3, it clears this diagonal for the light squared bishop. That's why we can say that this move is super good. Besides, if this bishop retreats, this knight can jump here, giving a super annoying check to the king. Black retreated the bishop to the e7 square to control this square right here. It makes a lot of sense for what I just told you. Otherwise, they'd lose the right to castle. White, speaking of castles, Anatoly Karpov castles. Black develops this knight. Notice that he's delaying castling. Nobody knows why. The truth is that no one can question these types of players on why they do one thing or another. And white plays bishop to d2. The idea of bishop to d2 is very simple. Develop this bishop to be able to connect the rooks. It's the last piece they have left to develop. Do they develop it here to attack this point? No, because it's super well defended. Notice they develop it here simply because they can't hear. They can't hear. They can't hear. Therefore, they have to develop it right here. Queen to c7, they complete the development with the queen, and now they're targeting this pawn, which is white's #1 weakness, only defended by this knight, and right now attacked by 2 pieces. Therefore, white should take action regarding this point. Since it's very complicated to defend, they opt to do something. They opt to directly attack the opponent's knight. Look at what I told you a moment ago. They're attacking the knight. Therefore, we can't capture here, we must move the knight or capture en passant, which is actually what black did. Very logically, they must capture en passant so that this pawn disappears and they stop attacking the knight. Here, he recaptured with the knight for a very simple reason. By recapturing with the knight, now they are defending this pawn with the queen and with the knight. That is, with 2 pieces, this pawn is now fully protected. It has created tension between these 2 knights, and black wonders, what do I prefer, to be captured or to capture myself? Look, if they let themselves be captured, these doubled pawns would look very ugly here. 2 doubled pawns and also isolated, because they don't have pawns on their sides. That's why black decided to capture with the knight. Now, here I ask you, dear followers, what would you do? Would you recapture with the bishop or would you recapture with the pawn? Well, the correct answer is to recapture with the bishop, since if you recapture with the pawn, this pawn becomes isolated. It has no pawns on the sides, and an isolated pawn is usually a weakness. That's why, by capturing with the bishop, look at what 2 great bishops he's left with here, and also these 2 pawns are no longer isolated. The black pieces made this knight jump. That looks very interesting. They're attacking this bishop that has few squares to go to. Notice that it can't come through here. Here, it would be making a bishop exchange. It could be a solution. And back here, they'd be losing the bishop pair, okay? Another solution would be to come over here. What will the white pieces choose here? Well, they directly choose to give up the bishop pair, but by giving up this dark squared bishop. Look, and if you don't know, I'll tell you now, that the opponent or the player who has the bishop pair on the board has a slight advantage over the rival. Why? Because notice that the light squared bishop controls the light squares and the dark one controls the dark ones. Between the 2 of them, you control all the squares on the board. That is, if you have the bishop pair, you have a slight advantage over your rival. In this case, after the bishop recapture, the black pieces already have the bishop pair, while the white ones don't have the bishop pair. They take advantage now that they have this open file to attack the opponent's queen. Notice one thing. the black pieces aren't castled yet, and that's a point against them. They're attacking our queen. We have to move it. In this case, we find a very juicy square where no one can attack it on a dark square. Why? Because our opponent doesn't have a dark squared bishop, and so it's going to be much safer. The white pieces, what are they trying to do? Well, a very logical move. Black has the bishop pair and white doesn't. Well, with this move, what he's doing is practically forcing black to give up the bishop pair because this bishop can't move now because he'd lose the rook. That is, now they either capture or let themselves be captured. Here, the black piece is castled, sorry, and let this bishop be captured. For now, the white player, Anatoly Karpov, is in no hurry to capture this bishop, since this bishop is currently very well placed toward the opponent's castle position. And notice that black doesn't have enough pieces to defend, and now it seems that Anatoly is pressing in a super strong way. Therefore, here surely, many of you would be trembling. The queen can come in, he can come in with many pieces, and this attack is starting to get dangerous. However, the black player's hand didn't shake. First, he attacked Anatoly Karpov's knight. Anatoly Karpov, instead of moving this knight away, went in to give a check to the king, which seems very dangerous because now this bishop is defended by the knight, but by moving the king, they're attacking this bishop, and if at any point they decide to withdraw the knight, they'd simply lose a piece. However, here, the white pieces don't decide to withdraw the knight, but instead decide to withdraw the bishop to here. And why can't this knight be captured right now? Well, look, because simply check would come, the king has to move, and checkmate would follow. Look at Anatoly Karpov, the tremendous attack he had here. Anatoly Karpov, one of the best players in history, had it all planned out. That knight can't be captured. The player with the black pieces is just as skilled and obviously doesn't take this knight, but attacks it with the bishop instead. He realizes that knight is untouchable. Anatoly Karpov now must retreat this knight, as it could be taken by the bishop, so he moves it to the e4 square. On this square, it's now perfectly centralized and is targeting very weak squares in the black position. By the way, I'm recording today with a headache I can barely stand, you know? I'm sure many of you have noticed it in my voice, but it's unbelievable. So if you give me a like, I would truly be eternally grateful to you. Here, the black pieces decided to occupy the file. It's very important when there's an open file. What is an open file? A file where there are no opponent's pawns or our own, okay? A completely open file. So white had the open file, black didn't, so he decides to occupy it too and fight for the file against the white pieces. A very logical solution. Now, capturing here wouldn't be a very good idea because after the recapture, black would be the one left with the open file all to themselves. That's why the white pieces continue their game, and what they do is place the queen on d3 with a very simple idea. Notice that when this knight moves, wherever it goes, they are threatening checkmate on this square right here. That's why he places the queen and the bishop in a brutal battery to come and attack this checkmate here. What the black pieces do now is capture this rook. Do you remember what I told you? Now, by capturing this rook, with the recapture by the other rook, it's the white pieces that have kept the file. However, right now, black doesn't care too much, because after the exchange, what they can do is capture this pawn, and they've gained an extra pawn. A pawn that is sometimes very important, and sometimes not so much. Let's see in this game if having this extra pawn is very important. Besides, they are now carrying out a double attack. Having eliminated a rook, they attack the rook and also attack this pawn here. The white pieces, obviously, if they have to defend one of the two, they defend the rook. And what they do is place it on the same file as the pawn. Why? Because if they take this pawn, which the black pieces actually do, they'll likely have problems when moving this knight, right? But notice one thing, black already has two extra pawns. The white pieces try to win back this pawn, and they're only down one pawn right now, and they make a brutal double attack. They attack this bishop, and they attack this other one. What solution do the black pieces find here to save one of the two bishops? Well, sometimes when two of your pieces are attacked at once, you should use one of them to attack a higher value piece, okay? Keep this in mind. If two of your pieces are attacked at once, you should use one of them to attack a higher value piece. In this case, they use this bishop to attack the rook. Now, it wouldn't be possible to capture this bishop because they'd simply capture the rook, which is worth more than that bishop. That's why the white pieces must move the rook. They move the rook over here. Why? Because now they could launch an attack along the third rank. You know that rooks can sometimes enter through the third rank and carry out some tremendous attacks. The black pieces, having a material advantage, notice they're currently up a pawn, want to trade queens. When you have a material advantage, the ideal thing is to try to trade pieces. That way you reach an endgame with extra pieces. White, even so, accepts this trade because they don't feel at all inferior. Trade here, recapture with the bishop. Notice the black still has the bishop pair and an extra pawn, meaning a somewhat interesting advantage, right? They move this K in, this knight, while attacking the bishop. White is now trying at all costs to eliminate that bishop pair, which is a headache for the white pieces, right? And here, obviously, they don't capture this bishop, this knight, sorry. Instead, what they do is play this rook. Mind you, allowing this bishop to be captured? Why? Because if they capture this bishop, this brutal checkmate would simply follow. They could block with the rook, but after rook takes rook, they would simply be checkmate and this king couldn't go anywhere. That's why this bishop can't be captured here. Black had everything under control. What they do is bring the knight here because now they prevent this entry with the knight. Now there would indeed be no checkmate problem. Black launches an attack with the pawns, playing the move g5, a move that might seem strange, but, well, they're expanding with the pawns to be able to bring the king into the attack. You know that the king in endgames is a piece of utmost importance. The white pieces seem to be giving away a pawn, right? However, if this pawn is captured, notice these two pawns would be left isolated and doubled, which would be too great a weakness, and they'd end up both being captured far too easily. That's why, guys, when they give away a pawn to double pawns like this, don't take here, okay? These two pawns would be left far too weak. What the black pieces do is ignore the threat and bring the king into the attack. White captures this pawn, black recaptures without any problem, and white plays this bishop and places it in a much better position, in a central position, while also attacking this pawn. Black doesn't hesitate for a second to advance this pawn. Notice something super important. Whenever you have a bishop defended by a pawn, it's gonna be the strongest thing you have in chess. Why? Because they can never take this pawn because the bishop defends it, and they can never take this bishop because this pawn defends it. A piece inferior to the bishop is simply a pawn, and since no pawn can attack it, this'll be tough for life, okay? They defend each other. White plays the rook to g3 to be able to put pressure on this pawn. Right now, they'd be threatening rook takes pawn check, and black simply defends it by bringing in the king. Notice that you shouldn't be afraid to bring the king into the game in the endgames. It's very important. Notice that this king is much more active than this one, and in endgames, that is of utmost importance. You're going to see it next. White moves the rook, a move that seems to be useless, but it's a prophylactic move because black was going to play this and attack this rook. And now this rook can move freely along this file. Where do they play the rook? Well, notice that they're going to have to give it away. What? Because there's no way to save this rook. Wherever it goes, it's going to end up being captured by the bishop, okay? Notice something super important. Right now, what are the white pieces threatening? I'll explain it to you. Let's assume that white plays the rook over here, okay? The rook here, it seems like no one can attack it. Simply, this bishop could attack easily, but the rook could come back here and it seems like no one can attack it. Well, this rook would be too far out of play. With moves like this one here, which is attacking this pawn, it's true that it could be defended the same way I told you, right? They defend each other, but you'll see that the white pieces here no longer coordinate at all. Simply, they could try to enter with this rook with a lethal attack. If they try to go this way with the king, then the white pieces could capture this pawn here with the bishop. If they try, for example, to attack this bishop with the rook, well, they could simply enter here, check, and as soon as the king moves, they could either capture here or come through here, and they'd win this rook in the same way. Notice that white doesn't coordinate their pieces, and that's why it's so important right now that the black pieces have one, the bishop pair, and two, coordinated pieces. So what happens? We were in this position. I'm going to put it back as it was, like this. In this position where the rook was here, correct? Like that. Good. Where the white pieces have the rook well trapped, what Anatoly Karpov decides to do with the white pieces is play this king f1 must join the attack. He comes here with the bishop and now tries to enter even more with the attack, with the king on the attack. The rook changes direction. Now it wants to enter through this square here. But well, here the white piece is still, seems like nothing's happening to him, right? They try to fight with this move. They launch their pawn into the attack. The black pieces don't hesitate to capture it. The white pieces recapture with the knight. Right now they're attacking this bishop. You already know that the black pieces don't want to give up the bishop pair. Notice how they've been fighting all game not to give up the bishop pair, and this will surely give them the victory. Right now, the white pieces pull back this knight from here before it gets captured. Check with the rook. The king doesn't have much of an escape other than coming through here. They come here with the rook to attack this point. Notice they're attacking it with two pieces, so now it must be defended. How do they do it? Well, by moving the pawn. Could it be captured now? No, because the rook is there. Notice the knight doesn't defend because it's pinned, but the rook does. So what the black pieces do is drop this bombshell, which attacks the rook and also attacks this knight. Right now, the black pieces are putting on way too much pressure. Notice the work the bishop pair is doing. One attacks on the light squares, and the other attacks on the dark squares. White must move this rook. They move it to the only square it can go while defending this pawn. And now the black rook comes to attack this pawn as well. They're running out of defenses. White decides to move the king out of the pin, and now's the moment when black decides to trade their bishop pair. Why? Because now they know they can take advantage of the lead. They eliminate the defender of this pawn, and when it's captured here, they win this other pawn. And now look at this, rook and bishop, but three pawns against one. And these two pawns are just too strong to be stopped. They try to attack this pawn right here. Notice that trading rooks here would be very bad news for the white pieces because they'd be left with one bishop each and a two-pawn advantage. That's why they try to hold on to their only strong piece, which is the rook. And after defending this pawn, white decided to resign because it's impossible to make any progress. The white pieces only have this pawn, which will never be able to advance. And look at this. It's defended by the pawn I told you that no one will ever be able to beat. So here the white pieces decided to resign the game. A very interesting opening. If you want me to explain how to play it more in depth, please let me know in the comments because it's an opening that can bring you a lot of joy. If they can beat the best, one of the best in history, you can beat your rivals on chess.com, okay? So it's a very interesting opening. Give me a big thumbs up for that headache that I still recorded through so you guys could enjoy it, huh? And I'll see you in the next video, friends. Bye.